Outdoor Hotline is made possible in part by the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, AETN's partner in conservation.
Good evening and welcome to Outdoor Hotline here on AETN. I'm Tony Brooks. Tonight we'll be talking more about chronic wasting disease in Arkansas and water management on green timber reservoirs at Arkansas Game and Fish Commission wildlife management areas. But first, let's address some of the changes in licensing and enforcement procedures by the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. You can call us at 1-800-662-2386 or you can email us your questions at outdoors@aetn.org. With us to answer your questions, we have from the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission Enforcement Division, Major Glenn Tucker, Captain Matt Flowers, and Captain Kirk Harris. Gentlemen, thank you for being here with us tonight. Major Tucker, let's start with you. What are the most dramatic changes hunters need to be aware of this fall?
First of all, thank you for having me, Tony. Yeah, one of the biggest changes most sportsmen are going to notice this year is a change in our license system. We've gone from your standard license everybody's used to with the tags and the Tyvek type paper. We've gone to a we wanted to create more options for the sportsmen out there is what we wanted to do. Right. And some of those changes are you can now purchase your license online. You can still go to a licensed vendor, and what you will receive is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper is what you'll receive if you go with that option. The other options that we have is an electronic option that you can put on your phone that you can keep on your phone. That way you don't need to carry this. The good thing about the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper is you can print off as many as you need. Okay, you can keep one in your toolbox or your tackle box, your glove box, keep one in your wallet. That way you're not going to be misplacing them that often. The good thing about the electronic version that we have now that's available, you can, if you will, whenever you purchase a license, you can have that electronic version saved on your phone, on your smartphone, and that way that you'll always have it with you. A lot of times I'll forget my wallet, but I hardly ever forget my telephone. Right. So those are some of the options that we have. The third option is a plastic card option now. This is going to be about the size of a credit card. It's going to be personalized on the front, and on the back it'll have all of your privilege codes. It's going to be, that's a $3 option to upgrade to that. But what I would suggest is that if you do go for that option, that you make sure that you do carry either the paper copy or you carry that electronic copy on your phone, so that, because it takes about 3 weeks to get that in the mail. So you're gonna need some proof that you have purchased a license until that hard copy does come in the mail.
So really, basically what you guys are doing is just trying to make it easier for the hunter.
Yeah, that's it. We want to give them more options to make it more convenient for them. They can purchase this from the from the comforts of their own home, or they can still go to a licensed vendor to purchase these. But it's more convenient for them, and it gets them out in the field faster, and that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay. This kind of goes back to what you talked about. So as we move away from paper documentation that we're all familiar with, if I can show an officer an electronic copy of my license, am I still legal? Yes,
you are. Yeah, that's one of the options. Option number 2 was the electronic license that you can carry on your phone. You get approached by an officer in the field, show them that electronic copy. It's going to look identical to this, but it's just going to be on your phone.
Save it on your phone.
It'll be on your phone, and that way that officer can look, make sure that you are current with everything. And if for some reason your battery does go dead on your phone, or this is the only copy you have and it gets damaged, we still have the ability to call in and check and make sure that you're up to date on all of your privileges.
Because it would happen to me. The battery would go dead.
It would happen to me as well.
Okay. Here's a deer hunting question for Captain Flowers. If I shoot a button buck, do I have to tag it as a buck, or can I tag it as a doe?
Well, Tony, this happens quite often. Hunters are out there on the stand, and and they harvest what they think is a doe, walk up to it and realize, well, this isn't a doe, it's a small button buck. If that's the case and you mistakenly shoot a button buck, then you do have to check that buck as a button buck, and that will apply towards your buck bag limit.
Okay. Captain Harris, here's a question from a duck hunter. What are the stipulations for the new non-resident waterfowl wildlife management area permit?
Yes, we have a non-resident waterfowl WMA permit this year, and this is going to be required of non-residents to hunt on our WMAs. One thing to keep in mind is this permit is WMA specific, so you have to buy one for each individual WMA that you're going to be hunting, and it's only good for 5 days, and each individual hunter is going to be limited to 6 permits that they can purchase throughout the hunting season.
Now, if someone has further questions about this is all in the literature that you can
Yes, absolutely. Highly encourage everyone. The waterfowl guidebooks are not out quite yet, but they will be coming pretty soon. When they do, by all means pick one up, thumb through it, read through it, answer any questions you may have. Most questions can be found within that book. And toward the back of the book, I believe begin on page 45 is where our WMA specific regulations will start, and each individual WMA has its own section in there, and anything that's unique to that one WMA will be specified underneath that section.
Okay. Glenn, this caller asks, if I need a permit to hunt in wildlife management areas, what is that permit for and how much does it cost?
Okay, I believe what that caller's probably referring to is the new general use permit for all WMAs. That is a permit that is going to be required now to hunt or trap. Only those 2 activities, hunt and trap, on any WMA around the state. And what that permit is for is for our wildlife management division. It's an information gathering tool for them, so they can see who's utilizing our WMAs, what they're utilizing them for, so they can, manage that product a little bit better for the sportsmen out there. The permit is free. It costs absolutely nothing, but if you are going to hunt a WMA in the state, that is something that you are going to need to have.
Here's a question I'll just throw out there. We were talking about this earlier. Nobody surely goes out there with the intent of breaking the law. I mean, I'm especially careful when I go out that I've got everything that I have to have with me. What's the most common violation you guys run into?
Oh goodness, Matt.
Well, we run into all kinds of violations, but probably the most common we have, where I'm from in the central part is a trespassing violation. They're not sure, this property was posted, and they wander on to somebody else's property. Every now and again, we know we have those who forget to purchase their license or renew their license, but it's like you said, not everybody intentionally breaks the law, but mistakes happen, and we understand that. But those are the most common we see in my part of the state.
Okay. Can an individual who has received citations in the past apply for a wildlife management area permit?
Yeah, yes, Tony. They can apply. However, our regulations read that if you have accumulated up to 12 points, then you are prohibited or you are barred from being able to get those permits, those certain permit hunts. But just because you've received a violation in the past does not necessarily mean you are prohibited from it. It just depends on the accumulation of the points that you do have.
So you need to be careful of those things that we overlook.
Absolutely.
That can lead to a citation.
And those smaller point citations, they add up if you continue to get them.
Right. Kirk, here's a deer hunting question for you. Can I use an electronic version of the federal duck stamp like I can with my state licenses and stamp?
No, you cannot. The federal law states in order to waterfowl hunt, you have to have a federal waterfowl stamp, and part of those regulations state that you must be in physical possession of that stamp. And you also have to sign across the face of it your signature. You cannot use an electronic version of that like you can our state license. You have to be in physical possession of that stamp in order to waterfowl hunt.
And Glenn and I were talking about this earlier. You do have to sign that stamp. So if you collect stamps, buy two.
You have to buy two. That's
Buy two.
correct.
You want one to collect without it. Glenn, this is from a deer hunter. If I shoot a deer and immediately check it on my phone before moving it, do I still have to tag it?
Tony, no, you don't. That's kind of new this year as well. As long as you are able to check that deer immediately before you move it on your phone using our app or using the website, then no, you do not have to tag it, except in the event you ever break contact with that deer. If you take it from the point of harvest to your home and you never break contact with that deer, then no, you do not have to tag it. Now, in the event you take it back to deer camp or take it to a taxidermist or take it to a processor and you break contact with that deer, then you must have some information on that deer to note who you are, your customer ID number, the sex, the zone it was taken, the date it was taken, and the check number. And all that information can be found. What you would need to identify your kill is on page 28 of the guidebook. Okay. But in the event that you cannot check it immediately. You know, we do have some of these deer tags now. These are tags out of the book here that some common ways that our people have suggested that you may protect these in the event you do, because dragging them through the woods and them getting wet is going to take a toll on that piece of paper. So be creative. You can put them in Ziploc bags, Tony, or you can put them on anything durable, right? Just as long as the information that's in this book is contained on that tag.
Okay. Matt, here's a question that we addressed in a previous program. Are there any restrictions on using scents or lures to attract deer?
Yeah, there are, Tony. With the discovery of the chronic wasting disease here in Arkansas, the commission passed, whereas in January 2017, you were not allowed to use any type of scent or lure that's naturally from deer elk urine. This is just one of those things they put into place to help the spread of the disease to other parts of the state where we don't have it at this point.
And this is something we were talking about earlier too. I guess it's still illegal to sell it, but just because they sell it, you can't use it.
That's right. There's nothing saying you can't sell it. It's just saying you cannot use it as a lure or scent wildlife.
So don't assume just because you can buy it, you can use it.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Another duck hunter question here for Captain Harris. The caller wants to know if he can use electronic decoys when duck hunting on wildlife management areas.
That's a good question. On our state-owned WMAs, you cannot use any form of electronic or mechanical waterfowl decoy. You're limited to traditional style waterfowl decoys. They cannot have any kind of mechanical or wind-powered movement. It has to be just a traditional style waterfowl decoy. Now, you can still use a manually operated jerk string that a lot of people, have used through the years. Those are still legal, but no kind of mechanical or electrical powered decoy with any kind of moving port. No robo-ducks.
No robo-ducks. Matt, this viewer wants to know if someone owns land inside or surrounded by a wildlife management area, are they governed by the zone regulations or the WMA regulations?
Okay, if they own property within or an in-holding within a WMA, wildlife management area, and they are completely surrounded by that WMA, then they must follow the WMA seasons, bag limits as that WMA. They're separate from the zone regulations.
Okay. Kirk, we have a caller here who wants to know if there are any shell restrictions on wildlife management areas.
Yes, there are. There's not many. I believe that there's 6 WMAs across the state that has shot shell limit restrictions. On those 6, the limit is 15. Once again, I would advise people that once our waterfowl guidebook comes out, you pick up a copy, you go to the back and you look through the WMA specific guidelines and read for that particular WMA that you're going to be hunting and check to see if it might apply or not.
Okay. Here's a question for Matt. Can someone take an elk while deer hunting outside the core elk management zone?
They can. They can take an elk outside the core elk management zone. It can be harvested while legally deer hunting and with a weapon that is legal for that season. During that, the bag limit for the elk is 1 of either sex.
Okay. And here's, looks like one last question concerning regulations. Kirk, this duck hunter wants to know if his gear counts toward a boat's capacity limit.
Absolutely. Once again, very good question. The thing about this is it's very much of a safety concern. All your gear inside your boat does apply to the boat's capacity, and so especially for waterfowl hunters, you got to take into consideration guns, ammo, dogs, decoys, waders. Everything that's in that boat does apply to that capacity. And you know, the safety part of that is once you get overloaded, you're much more likely to possibly overturn the boat. And now we have hunters in cold water, and you know, the two just don't match. So yes, you need to add up all the weight of everything in that boat.
You know, as we look at all these regulations and enforcement procedures, these are all aimed at really basically 2 things: preserving resources and keeping hunters safe.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
So really, you guys are out looking out for us.
That's right.
So pay attention and do what we're supposed to do. All right. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Our next topic is an extremely important one, especially for deer and elk hunters in the natural state: chronic wasting disease. Let's take a look at CWD in Arkansas.
As the natural state enters its 2nd deer season since the detection of chronic wasting disease, the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission continues to take actions to manage the disease and gain a better understanding of it. Since routine testing detected the disease in a cow elk in Newton County in October 2015, the disease has been found in a total of 216 animals, 209 whitetails and 7 elk in 6 additional counties. Last year, the Commission established a 10-county CWD management zone. Although the disease has been found in just 7 counties, Johnson, Logan, and Yell counties were included because of proximity to positive CWD cases. This year, Van Buren County was added to the CWD zone after a positive elk was harvested just across the county line in Searcy County. One of the most important regulations for the CWD zone prohibits the movement of any portion of a deer or elk from the CWD zone to other parts of the state. There's an exception for deboned meat and finished taxidermy products.
Each one of the regulations that the Commission passed, we viewed them as strategies. Strategies to help us reach our goals. And we have 2 goals associated with chronic wasting disease management. And one of them is to minimize the spread of the disease. We want to contain it inside the management area. And then also the second goal is to minimize the amplification of the disease, is do not amplify it in those already established areas.
Complete regulations, as well as an extensive fact sheet about CWD, are available online at arkansascwd.com. In addition to implementing regulations to manage CWD, the Game and Fish Commission also is tackling the disease through research. Once the initial response and sampling efforts were completed, one of the Commission's next steps was establishing a new research division, which included the hiring of the Commission's first state wildlife veterinarian, Dr. Jen Ballard.
After the detection of chronic wasting disease, the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission brought in a team of experts to really help guide the management and response to the disease. And one of the things that team of experts strongly recommended is that we have a greater presence in doing chronic wasting disease research and just a variety of research, because we know that helps support our mission as a wildlife and fisheries management agency. And so from that came the new Research, Evaluation, and Compliance Division. There's already a lot of research happening around the agency, and so we're just helping to do more research and helping some of our biologists do their research better, or get new ideas, or make sure they're using the absolute, cutting-edge methods that we can be using to get the best available information. I assist the Commission, its fisheries and its wildlife management divisions, in managing our fish and wildlife resources for overall population health. So instead of focusing on individual animal health, we try to make sure that we're managing in such a way that the populations are healthy and sustainable.
That includes all kinds of work, such as these surgeries to implant tracking devices in American eels. But because CWD poses such a serious risk to the state's deer and elk populations, Ballard spends a lot of time working with commission biologists to manage CWD in Arkansas.
I help the Wildlife Management Division with several aspects of chronic wasting disease management. I help them develop biosecurity protocols to make sure that we're handling everything appropriately. We work on the regulations together so that we try to come up with regulations that reflect the best possible management of the disease. And then I also help direct some of the research projects, identifying some of the questions we need answered to better manage the disease, and then looking for researchers to collaborate with to make those projects happen.
One ongoing project is looking into genetics as a way of better understanding disease pathways.
You can look at how the populations subdivide themselves, and by understanding how genes flow between populations, you can get an estimate of how you would expect disease to flow or move between populations, and that helps us to better manage our populations, help manage chronic wasting disease, and it also tells us, the overall relatedness of the individuals that are affected, so we may be able to identify patterns.
One thing hasn't changed for the state's second deer season since CWD detection. Game and Fish still needs the public's help to manage the disease.
We need a lot more information to manage this properly, and we can't possibly go out and collect all the samples we need on our own, so we really depend on the participation of our hunters.
Game and Fish staff will be operating voluntary deer check stations in each of the 11 counties in the CWD management zone during the opening weekend of modern gun season this fall. They'll take samples to test for CWD and give hunters a number that can be checked later to find out if their deer tested positive. Hunters also can help by complying with regulations designed to help prevent the spread of CWD.
One of the most important things hunters can do to help us with the management of chronic wasting disease is to not move carcasses or potentially infected material outside of the CWD management zone. So anyone who harvests an animal within the zone, we ask that they go ahead and debone their meat and leave the brain, the spinal cord, and the bones and all of those materials inside the zone, and just bring the deboned meat, finished taxidermy products, things like that, out of the zone.
Many questions about CWD remain for both wildlife managers and hunters. Among the state's hunters, one of the most common questions centers on the safety of eating deer or elk. The Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends not consuming animals that have tested positive for CWD.
We certainly defer to their expertise in this area, and they recommend testing animals if you know you're hunting in a CWD positive zone. So we have created as many opportunities for hunters as possible to make that easy and simple, and to get results back to them as quickly as possible. So if you're in the zone, we have lots of options, but even if you're outside the zone and you would feel better having your animals tested, we have veterinarians and taxidermists around the state who are participating in those efforts, and all of the information for where you can get your deer sampled is available at arkansascwd.com.
And joining us now to answer your questions about chronic wasting disease are Cory Gray, AGFC Research Evaluation and Compliance Manager, Dr. Jen Ballard, Wildlife Veterinarian with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, and Ralph Meeker, Deer Program Coordinator with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. Dr. Ballard, let's start with you. We've known about chronic wasting disease since the late 60s, 67, I believe, when it was identified by Dr. Elizabeth Wilson in Colorado. And there's no simple way to answer this, but what makes CWD so different than other diseases that may impact deer or elk, and why is it so difficult to deal with?
Well, it is a complicated question, but it's part of a group of diseases known as transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, and those are caused by misfolded proteins that are very persistent in the environment, and so once they're there, they're very difficult to get rid of, and that's one of the reasons it's such a challenge to manage.
And these things are almost impossible to destroy. It's not like a virus or a bacteria. They're there. Once they're there, they are there.
Over time, they do eventually, we think, break down maybe long term, and we know there are a few chemicals and high heat and pressure can destroy them. So they're not indestructible, but they're certainly very, very difficult to break down.
And I'm sure there's ongoing research about how you can do just that.
Yes, definitely. It's really a global question. There's many prion diseases, and that's one of the questions around all of them.
Okay. Cory, we have discussed here before, the Game and Fish Commission knew about CWD. You guys knew this before it was detected here in Arkansas. You knew about it early on. So you've been getting ready for this for some time.
That's true. I mean, I guess if there is a good side of this story is that we are the 24th state to find it, and so there's 23 others that we can learn from. But in 2006, we developed a CWD response plan, and so we placed that plan on the shelf just for when the day comes. And so when we were able to find CWD in 2016, we were able to take that plan down. We did modify it briefly, I mean, just because the science had changed some, but we were able to quickly make those changes and then get it approved by our commission and then start implementing our plan. So we wasn't caught flat-footed. It's a good part of this story.
So did you travel to other states where it was and see how they were dealing with it and how that might work or not work in Arkansas?
Well, we actually brought the states to us. We went out, and some of the leading researchers and veterinarians in the nation, we went out and asked them to come to us. Dr. Margaret Wild from the Park Service came immediately. She was one of our partners that stepped foot in Arkansas immediately. Dr. Mike Samuel from Wisconsin also came in, and there were several others that we were able to bring in and ask them, you know, here's what we know about CWD in Arkansas. Now help us develop a game plan on going forward.
Okay, Ralph, here's a question. What Arkansas wildlife species do we definitely know are affected by CWD?
So, chronic wasting disease, or CWD, affects members of the deer family. And so here in Arkansas, that would be our white-tailed deer and our elk.
One of the problems, and again, I may be repetitive here, but one of the problems that you guys have to deal with is the spread, and I think you've done a remarkable job of containing it. But it can be spread, Dr. Ballard, by scavengers like crows. Talk about how CWD is primarily spread.
Well, that's a good question. They can be spread by people moving materials, infectious materials, infected animals. It has been demonstrated to pass through the GI tract of other animals, and so it can travel on the hoof, it can travel in a truck, it can travel a lot of different ways, and so there's no one single answer, I think.
Okay. We know that it's, as you said earlier, it's similar to the other diseases like mad cow disease and another version in sheep. Are there any instances where CWD has actually been spread to livestock?
They've demonstrated that it can be under very specific experimental conditions in a lab, specifically if it's injected directly into the brain. But under normal conditions on the landscape, I'm not aware of it ever having been documented to spread to livestock.
So it's not like you need to panic if you see a deer in your cattle pasture.
No.
It's not going to be spread that way. The major concern is can CWD be transmitted to humans?
Yeah, we always default back to the Center for Disease Control. I mean, those are the experts when it comes to the human illness side of this. There's been no documentation that it can transfer from a deer, from a cervid into a human, but we always need to be cautious. And so we recommend that you not consume any positive animal. But we always kind of take that a step further. Is if there's any sickness or illness or oddity about the animal that you harvest, we don't recommend you eat that animal. I mean, there's a lot of other diseases and illnesses out there that a whitetail or other animals can carry, parasites. And so if you run across that, we ask you not to consume that animal. To me, that's just a kind of a wise common sense thing, but regardless if it's CWD or hemorrhagic disease or what other illness, if that animal's showing some sort of illness, don't consume that animal.
We've been monitoring this for some time. How long does it take when an animal, once infected with CWD, begins to show symptoms, and what are some of the outward symptoms that we can recognize as CWD?
Yeah, so research suggests that within 6 months of that animal picking up the prion, it can actually start shedding those prions. Incubation time, or before they start actually seeing some outward symptoms, is usually around 16 to 18 months. So, it's an extended period of time before that animal looks sick. Some of the symptoms, excessive drooling, salivation, excessive urination, loss of fear of humans. They may just stand there in that same position, what we call the A-frame stance, with the legs out straight, wide for a long period of time, drooping head, drooping ears. I do want to make note, though, that just because it shows some of these symptoms, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has CWD. There are a lot of other diseases and even injuries that can manifest themselves into those same symptoms. So, you know, if someone does see a deer like that, we do want them to call. We have a 1-800 number, and they can also go on our Game and Fish website to report that. But again, just because it's showing some of those abnormalities doesn't necessarily mean by default it has CWD.
Now, are you guys still doing the tests on deers that you find like roadkill? Are you still testing those to monitor to see if, and I'm assuming the rate in the containment area is about the same as it is anywhere else?
Yeah, so, you know, we're picking up roadkill statewide. We're also going after deer that are exhibiting some of those abnormal behaviors. But, you know, inside that CWD zone, you know, where those 7 counties where we have detected CWD, it is a little higher, and that's to be expected. But we are looking statewide for detection purposes.
Do we know how CWD arrived in Arkansas?
No. And we probably won't ever receive that luxury of knowing exactly how it got here. And, you know, there's a lot of questions about, did we bring it in when we brought the elk in? You know, we brought in 112 elk from 1981 to 1985, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that some of these elk may have had this disease, but we always try to go with what we know and live in that world, even though it may be a small world we stay in, but we need to live there. But you know, regardless of whether we brought it in 1981 and 85, the science just wasn't there to know about this disease. But right now we have it. This is the hand that's been dealt us, and so we need to play that hand out the best way we can with the best available science that we have right now.
Where I know I think we brought up a map just a while ago. In this containment zone, what kind of an area are we talking about? And we could take another look at that map, but how wide of an area in Arkansas are we talking about where there has been positive identification of CWD?
So we've actually detected it in 7 counties. The northernmost counties border the Missouri line. The southernmost county, which is Pope County, and we actually found it at the very southern tip of Pope County at the Nuclear One power plant. So our CWD zone, even though we've only detected it in 7 counties, our CWD zone encompasses 11 counties, and that's because some of those counties are in very close proximity to some of the positives that we have detected it.
And I'm sure this changes depending upon the sampling that you take, but do we have any idea of the percentage of deer and elk that's infected in the containment zone?
Not in that whole entire CWD management zone, we do not. But now inside of Newton County, we did develop a focal area. And for our Phase 1 actions back in March of 2016, we did randomly sample 266 whitetails in that, we call it the racetrack, but it's a focal area. And out of those samples, 23% prevalence. So those were randomly collected, so that we felt like that was a good, adequate sample to look at the prevalence in that whitetail in that area.
How does this compare with other states where CWD has been detected? I'm sure it's how you deal with it that makes a tremendous difference, but give me a little synopsis of when it appears, how does it spread, and is Arkansas is the same thing happening here that's happened in other states where it was discovered?
I'd say in general, when it was first discovered, our prevalence was a bit higher than other states, but over time, there are several states that have a similar prevalence as they've worked on trying to manage the disease, but ours was a bit higher than expected at first detection.
Okay. This goes back to a question that I asked just a moment ago about the CWD management zone in Arkansas, and again, the measures that are being taken within that zone.
Yeah, so there's a few different focuses. One of them is to manage the prevalence. We want to do things to make sure that we're not amplifying how much CWD we have on the landscape. The other one is to manage spatial distribution. We don't want it to spread to new areas so that we have to fight multiple outbreaks. So a lot of that goes back to how we manage deer populations, how we potentially move around infected materials. So that's why we require folks to only bring out deboned meat and taxidermy products. Why we ban the use of natural deer urines because a lot of those are bottled within CWD positive states in high fenced enclosures, and so there's a lot of risk management there on what we can and can't do. We don't want to put too much burden on our hunters. I mean, we want people to deer hunt. We want them to enjoy themselves, but in the same sense, we want to make sure that we're implementing regulations that's going to help us battle CWD.
What about outside the containment zone? Are the measures as severe outside the zone? Are they similar?
They're pretty much business as usual. We're still picking up roadkills. We still, we've asked taxidermists even outside the management zone to help us detect it. So we want to make sure that business as usual. We did not regulate or minimize the use of baiting outside the CWD management zone. Baiting is another thing that inside the CWD management zone we didn't want to artificially congregate deer unnecessarily, so that the increase of spread would happen. So outside the zone we're still doing business as usual. We want to make sure that we're looking even closer so that we can detect it if it is there and respond accordingly.
Will CWD ever be eradicated completely? I know that's an impossible question to answer, but
I think it's unlikely because of the amount of persistence in the environment. Unless there was a new technology or a huge stride made, I think we're a long way from a day that we could think about eradication.
If I have a deer that I've harvested and I either in or without outside of the zone, can I have that meat tested and wait to consume it until I get the results back? How long a process is that?
It generally takes about 2 weeks once the lab receives the tissues. And we do on ArkansasCWD.com is a list of participating taxidermists. We have a great relationship with taxidermists in the state. We also have some participating veterinarians. So we would encourage hunters to go to ArkansasCWD.com, take a look at what taxidermists are in that area, and if you want your harvest tested, just make sure you contact those taxidermists prior to showing up because they're hunters as well. I mean, they may not be there to shop, but it'll be a free of charge if you take it to a taxidermist. Now, the veterinarian may charge you a fee, but if you'll visit one of these participating taxidermists, we will handle the sample. Once we submit it off, it takes about 2 weeks.
Okay. We're almost out of time for this segment, but I wanted you to tell me about the research, evaluation, and compliance division and its role.
Yeah, it's a brand new division in the agency, and I was selected to lead this division. Dr. Ballard is our first hire as a wildlife veterinarian. We're very proud to have her, but it's a highly specialized unit. We have Dr. Chris Medall as our research biologist. But it's going to be a highly specialized unit to research not only CWD and learn about CWD, but all the other species that we have in our state.
You guys are doing some great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And welcome to Arkansas.
Thank you.
Thank you for all being here tonight. We're going to take a look at some of the changes in the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission's water management program in green timber reservoirs on AGFC wildlife management areas. Let's take a look.
The natural state is known far and wide for its superb duck hunting, but it's the abundance of flooded green timber hunting that sets Arkansas apart from other popular duck hunting destinations.
I've heard people refer to timber hunting in all sorts of different woods that aren't really anything like the true timber hunting in Arkansas. You just don't have these large blocks of public land like we have in Arkansas that are accessible to pretty much anyone. They're just a remarkable resource. It is something completely unique. It's not available on this scale really anywhere else in the world.
Arkansas boasted more than 5 million acres of bottomland hardwood forests prior to European settlement. And while maybe 20% of that is all that remains, the natural state is far better off than many of its Mississippi River Delta neighbors. The construction of green tree reservoirs has also helped to preserve the state's green timber hunting legacy. GTRs, as they're commonly known, allow land managers to artificially replicate the seasonal flooding patterns of traditional bottomland hardwood forests. They provide critical habitat for migrating waterfowl and hunting opportunities for the state's duck hunters.
Green tree reservoirs are actually a very important part of what's left of the bottomland hardwood forest that was historically widespread in Arkansas all the way across the eastern part of the state.
Arkansas is famous for its wealth of public green timber hunting at places such as Biomeda and Black River wildlife management areas. But if the state's reputation as a mecca for green timber duck hunting is going to persist, water management on public green tree reservoirs must change. The artificial flooding regime that has been in place for decades has had negative effects on forest health.
The trees that live in those areas are trees that tolerate some flooding during the course of the year, mainly dormant season flooding, but not growing season flooding. Green tree reservoirs, of course, have been managed for waterfowl hunting primarily, at least in recent years. So the timing of the flooding in many cases in the past was geared more towards the timing of duck seasons as opposed to the timing of when the natural flooding would have occurred in those bottomland forests.
Over a lot of years, we've learned that what we call dormant season flooding maybe isn't, our understanding of that maybe isn't perfect, and maybe some of the flooding timing's been off quite a bit for quite a few years.
A growing body of scientific research over the past 2 decades has taught land managers and wildlife biologists that long-standing artificial flooding practices have caused trees to get sick, and in some cases, to die. We've also learned that oak species that are most beneficial to ducks and other wildlife are being replaced by more water-tolerant species such as green ash, elm, and overcup oak that have far fewer wildlife benefits.
There's no red oak regeneration happening within 1/10 of an acre. Everything that's in here is elm and overcut, which are more aquatic species.
You go out duck hunting and you just think a tree is a tree. Maybe we know the difference between cypress and some oaks, but within the oak trees, there's huge differences in the value to ducks. And mainly it boils down to the acorn being small enough that a duck can actually get it in its mouth.
When artificial flooding comes too early, stays too long, or rises too high, the signs of diminishing forest health slowly appear over time.
One of the consequences, certainly unintentional, is that the trees have been exposed to this kind of unnatural way that they have flooded in terms of the timing, the depth, the duration, the same thing year after year. When the trees get stressed, probably just like if you and I got sick, we start to see symptoms that indicate that the tree is not as healthy as it was.
This big nuttall oak that's leaning because its root mass is dying.
The Arkansas Game and Fish Commission will alter water management on its green tree reservoirs to try to mimic what happens naturally.
No rocket science here, but rather just trying to emulate or to replicate, if you will, what Mother Nature would have done naturally anyway. First off, make sure that we don't have prolonged flooding in the growing season, either in the fall or in the spring. Secondly, to try and replicate the things that occur across years so that we don't do exactly the same thing year after year, because that's not how Mother Nature did it.
Today's duck hunters may have to make some short-term sacrifices, but the long-term benefits make it worthwhile.
I'm an active duck hunter. Probably a lot of the people that are interested in this are active duck hunters. Everything that we're doing is not in any way to jeopardize that legacy of hunting. And we want to make it better, and we want to make it sustainable. And for sure, we want to make sure that we do it in a way that not just you and I can enjoy, but our children, our grandchildren, and for generations to come. That's what we've been entrusted with. We've been fortunate enough to be able to manage these spots, to do it in a way that's sustainable, and that's what we need to be doing going forward.
And joining us now to talk about these changes, we have with us Mr. Brad Carner, Arkansas Game and Fish Commission Chief of Wildlife Management, Luke Naylor, Waterfowl Program Coordinator with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, and Jason Jackson, AGFC Wetlands Program Coordinator. Gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. Brad or Luke, let's talk a little bit about the reason for these changes in water management practices is to preserve resources.
Right. Yeah, we're finally just taking notice. Folks have been noticing for a long time declining habitat quality. A lot of bottom and hardwood forests that are managed as green tree reservoirs. So that's just any forest that's got a levee or water control structure around it. And years and years and years of managing those mostly the same way year after year has led to a lot of changes in the habitat quality and composition of that habitat. So we're taking some actions to try to move it back the other direction.
How bad was the problem? I mean, was it obviously getting pretty serious?
It's pretty bad. Yeah, we went out and did. We've seen a lot of it. I mean, with some folks as we've started this, I think they've really just we've kind of put a name on what they've been seeing for a lot of years anyway. Some folks have been hunting out in these places for many, many years, have seen trees dying around them, they've seen the forest change, just didn't necessarily know exactly why. But yeah, we've seen a high number of trees are damaged, lots of red oaks, particularly nut-all oak, willow oak, a lot of folks call it pin oak, are really damaged, they're dying, or they have reduced crown size, lots of these symptoms that show that they're in really, really bad shape from water stress.
As we look at these changes, are there green tree reservoirs that are being kept dry this year?
But really, the changes that we've implemented for this year is simply delaying the timing of when we close water control structures. We're not intentionally holding anything dry throughout the entire year. We physically can't. Mother Nature will flood many of these areas. It may be later in the winter, but we've delayed closing of water control structures until no earlier than November 15th, and that's shifting back a full month later, in some cases 45 days later than what they had been operated the previous several years.
Is this something that you're going to have, I guess you're going to have to continue to do to keep the water level down, because as you said, it's gotten pretty bad. So how long do you anticipate, is this going to be an ongoing thing?
Yeah, it will in some form or fashion. We don't know that what we are doing this year is really just kind of a first step. So we'll have detailed water management plans for every GTR. I don't know, 2 to 5 years from now maybe, and then making a bunch of changes to infrastructure. So it's not that every year it's going to be like it is this year, but it's going to be for a few years while we kind of figure out what the long-term plan is.
Is there a rotation system among these reservoirs? I mean, are you doing this with all of them? Are you looking at some that are maybe having a more serious problem than others and rotating among those that have a bad situation?
The goal, I mean, we'll be reviewing, evaluating, changing, revising water management plans across all wildlife management areas that have GTRs. I believe there's 19 of those. But ultimately, the end goal will be that we have some sort of rotation, so that if there's a given group of wildlife management areas in one region, obviously we wouldn't operate all of those the same on a given year. And ideally, if it's a wildlife management area that has multiple impoundments, there would be variation even within that WMA, so that all impoundments wouldn't be operated the same on a given year. But we're still, as Luke mentioned, still a couple years from being at that point. But every WMA with a green tree reservoir on it will be included in this new process to revise water management plans.
Do you look at a time in the state where there'd be other additional wildlife management areas and green tree reservoirs? Are we at a maximum number? Or can the state feasibly purchase more and have more areas like this?
We could purchase more, I suppose. We'd have to. Actually, what people building green tree reservoirs now for, I don't know, for 10 or 15 years now, have had to abide by different regulations. If they get a permit to build a green tree reservoir, which dams up some sort of waterway of some kind. They've got to keep it dry 1 out of 3 years or 2 out of 5?
Right,
or?
no, can't exceed 3 out of 5 years. If it is, then it will have to be dry.
So we'd have to do the same thing. If we built new GTRs, they'd follow a more adaptive water management plan that wouldn't be flooded every year.
But we are looking not specifically at construction of new GTRs. We are looking to acquire more public lands for waterfowl hunting opportunity in general, and with first consideration being given to natural flooding of those. So not necessarily going in and with more infrastructure and constructing more green tree reservoirs, but we are actively looking to provide additional lands for public waterfowl hunting in the state.
Okay. Are you going to limit the number of people on wildlife management areas during the drier years, especially during the drier years? Is there going to be a cutback on the number of people that are allowed to come in?
Don't have any plans to do that as of now, no. These areas have experienced dry years in the past anyway, and any public land hunter knows that some years there's a whole lot of water and some years there's not very much. Last year was a great example on a few WMAs that didn't get a lot of water until later in the year. And so what we're planning on doing with management isn't something that's just totally different than what people have experienced before. It's just a little bit less regular flooding on purpose to the degree we can. So it's, I don't think there's no plans right now to do any kind of controlled access, draw hunts, anything of that nature.
Here's a question from another hunter, and you may have answered this. Are we going to be able to hunt the rest areas in the dry years like they used to?
No, the rest areas are rest areas, and they really don't function as waterfowl rest areas if they're hunted.
Right.
Yeah.
How many of those are there? Are there one in each?
How many rest areas do we have?
We have approximately 15 rest areas.
And those are essential for
Very
wildlife
essential.
management. Tell us about the purpose that they serve. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but what happens in these areas?
In most of them, they're what we call moist soil areas, where there's a lot of food out there for the waterfowl. So first off, it feeds a lot of them, and then of course it offers a little sanctuary type area where they're not being disturbed a whole lot. And then, lastly, we tried to regulate when there's new food and all different aspects out there for them. And we keep a lot of the moist soil areas flooded longer after duck season, which can also provide a lot of invertebrates and a lot of fuel to migrate back to the north. So they're very important. Some of the rest areas are in the GTRs, but they're on the upper ends where they're harder to flood, so it's naturally flooded areas for the most part.
Okay, here's a question. Will I be able to run my boat in the lanes with the shallower water, and are you going to cut more ditches like in the Big Lake Wildlife Management Area?
If they're part of infrastructure redesign, I guess I would say, if there's something that we look at infrastructure on a GTR, and if there's some part of that benefits moving water mainly off the area, then yeah, that could potentially also be a place folks could access with boats. But I don't see a whole lot of really like growth and big new boat runs that are created on purpose. A lot of them out there now are ones that people have just created over years and years of running down the same path. It's not stuff we created anyway. Unlike Big Lake, which is an example of one that's pretty abnormal actually.
The majority of them are sloughs, and a lot of our sloughs are kind of choked up now anyway, so that will be something that will be addressed. So it will be a multi-purpose boat run, if you would.
Okay. Are there going to be more walk-in areas?
We haven't talked about establishing regulatory-wise any more walk-in areas. We've tossed it around a little bit here and there, but there's no proposals. I don't see any proposals in the near future to create any by means of regulation. Now, if we have shallower water because of changed water management, then maybe by default some areas may have to walk more. But But as Jason was saying, there may be areas that you run a boat up a slough that we actually improve access through a slough because we need to do that for water management.
Right.
And then people can boat a certain distance, get out of their boat and walk the rest of the way, which a lot of folks do anyway now on GTRs.
Okay. Here's a question from Hunter. If the water management plans are meant to protect the timber, why are trees being cut in some of the wildlife management areas?
Well, part of this process too is trying to ensure that we regenerate the desirable forests that are out there, and a component of that is creating canopy gaps so that you have adequate sunlight that those desirable oaks will regenerate and sprout the next forest. And so a necessary component of this whole process is having active forest management within those areas to grow those next forests.
Here's a question from Hunter. What's the impact of controlling the flooding going on to have on feeding habits of the duck population in Arkansas?
These ducks are hardwired to come here when natural flooding happens. We've been putting water early in these GTRs for 50 to 60 years, but 50 to 60 years doesn't reset thousands and thousands of years of birds coming down the flyway and getting into these areas when natural rainfall and overbank flooding happens, which typically is not October or early November. It's typically late November and essentially building through mid-November. We see that in surveys we do, with fly area surveys, and it's typically that mid-December is when most of the big influxes of mallards are coming to Arkansas, and that's when the natural flooding's happening. That's when there's big surface water flooding, a lot of water on the landscape overall. And so they're tied into that more than they are the 50 years or so we've been providing this water unnaturally early.
Okay. Gentlemen, unfortunately we're out of time. I wish we had more time. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And thanks to all of you who are watching and calling and emailing in your questions. I'm Tony Brooks, and we'll see you again next time on Outdoor Hotline.
Outdoor Hotline is made possible in part by the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, AEGN's partner in conservation.